Hello, everybody, and welcome to our World Today, the Unionist Perspective. We are back, and we are looking at quite a few topics that we believe start to feel quite sensitive from the perspective that there are lots of people affected in these processes. And so our aim today is to delve into the spiritual core of what we believe is happening and shed some light there, as opposed to pointing fingers at any side that may be remiss in their actions. So we'd like you to please feel free to engage with us in the comments, and also please feel free to share any insights that you may have as we continue in our conversation. So I'm going to ask the team to open us up with the first one. I feel like it's probably quite fitting that we start off probably with the most sensitive one, which is obviously the conflict and declaration of war between Israel and Hamas, and quite a few challenges that we see coming up in the news around both sides being affected and how that is playing out in terms of support and probably quite a bit of opinion from many places around the world. So I'm going to ask the team to open us up with that conversation, and then we'll carry on from there.
Yeah, so basically to give a little bit of context, about 3 weeks to a month ago, basically a month ago, there was a terrorist attack from a Hamas subgroup towards Israelis. They flooded a festival that was taking place over the border. And yeah, they attacked also Israel with bombings, and they took hostages. So it's a little bit complicated as a situation. To be very matter of fact, Israeli intelligence didn't really see it coming, so right now they're trying to locate the group of people that have been abducted. And that's something that Peter Zian, who's an expert on geopolitics, explains pretty well. And there are a few people from different nations in that group. And yeah, and Hamas kept bombing parts of Israel. And, since people are being captive and since there is constant bombings, Israel decided to declare war on Hamas. And they asked for Palestinians of Gaza is the strip near the sea, to evacuate south in order to avoid bombings. Problem is that Gaza is basically like a prison camp. Since Hamas has been taking power and is quite literally a terrorist group in the past 15 years, in order to try to stop and contain terrorism there and overtaking of the territories, or very violent and brutal acts, that has been the case. And so basically there are 1 million people, now there are 2.3 million. It's the most dense place on earth, with a lot of people living toe to toe in a very industrial territory. And so there are not really the United Nations seems to say that there are not really places to evacuate. The problem is some people on the international scene feel Hamas would not stop if they're not being stopped. So there needs to be something that happens, and also like a lot of people, like French people, American people, Israeli people, are searching for their citizen there. So that's the current situation. And the current situation is made complicated by the fact that for like 100 years, there has been conflicts over territory in this region. And on top of the conflicts of territories, there have been conflicts of religion. And basically, it's a whole lot of like, let's say, separation. There is like a whole history of like wars that happened in the past century. And it's complicated enough that we won't dive into it quite yet. But that's the context that starts to paint the picture of what is happening right now for a lot of people in that region. So, how do you guys feel like? Because like we said, we would try to feel what is at the core of this, like spiritually, because we have a lot of like people arguing on facts and ethics and trying to defend people that are from their own religion, and there are people that just want a ceasefire because like they're saying that everyone on the sides of this war are humans, and it's just like too brutal to even think of carrying out. But like at the spiritual core, like what is it that is happening for you?
So the thing that stands out for me is, again, the sense of what has been over the year, what we've spoken about over the couple of years that we've been having the various conversations. It's the sense of a tribal war and vilifying the other in order to justify actions that may not be acceptable and that may not contribute to respecting life. And so for me, there's almost a big sense that the war is not necessarily between factions, but rather in acceptance, in being willing to accept other people and their way of life, and also to heal the wounds of the past, because these conflicts constantly come up, but at the core of it, there seems to be a big cry for healing, for acceptance of what we might not understand or appreciate of others, and almost releasing the judgment of others because we don't understand them and we don't accept them. So there's it's kind of multifaceted in terms of protect certain things at all costs, but do those costs justify the means?
Yeah, I appreciate what you were saying, because on both sides, we're seeing such actions that could be considered heinous of how to treat other people. And I know for Hamas, there has been a lot of people that are imprisoned from Israel, and we're not sure about the treatment of those individuals. And then on the other side, we see a long war going ahead and pushing people further and further inclusive into their area so that they can dominate more of the land. So that is a question of, are both sides acting morally? But it does shed a light to separation consciousness, the illusion of it, and as well as the core of it is bringing unity to it. And how can we peacefully bring unity to both sides? And is the actions that are being done, not just by Hamas and Israel, but other countries that are supporting either side, are those actions justified in the intention of union, or is it in the intention of separation? So here is the question, not just for Hamas, Palestine, or Israel, but for all of us, of which intention are we going to stand by? Unionism and of what's appropriate for everyone, or of just separation of what is rightfully theirs and not theirs? That's really the question that comes for the healing that I see is happening.
I definitely feel like it takes us back to the sermon that was also shared by Lorenzo and Alexandra, and that the fact is, as much as we're seeking the truth, we also need to seek out the lie so that we can make a new choice in the space of where that lie exists. And one of the things that stood out in their sermon was, you know, in your call for love and calling for love outside of yourself, there's kind of a part of you that perceives not love on the inside of you. And so that perception of not love on the inside of you will make you seek it outside of yourself. And so if we, back to your question, Nadia, in terms of, does this bring a desire for closer unity amongst humanity, or is it fueling the separation? So the question here is, what is the lie here? And for me, the lie is that because it's different, it must be fought. And, you know, it's literally distills it back to, I don't have to like everything, but I, as a baseline, should love my fellow man.
Yeah, well, what's been coming up for me too is I think one of the lies that I've been thinking is like, will these two sides ever get along, or like they'll never get along, or like, yeah, like you were saying, Granfo, like will you ever like your fellow man? But it's like, I think that's the lie, is that of course they can, and you have to, right? Like that's like how we were created to um you know to get along with each other, right? So maybe that's needs to be released too, is that like there is harmony at the core here, there is union at the core, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like, I don't know, when I inquire within as to what the problem is here, like what is the like upset here, I feel like it's just like a victimhood, a consciousness, yes, a choice of victimhood. And I feel like it's, you know, kind of both parties here are kind of experiencing that, like having an experience of victimhood. And then there's the question of like, what's the appropriate way to stand up for yourself there? And that's kind of the question that people are asking, no matter what their like view is of the situation. And like, so people are trying to say like, is it like an appropriate response? Because it is loving to stand up for yourself, obviously. If someone is like trying to like, you know, trying to harm you, like it's okay to stand up for yourself, but where people I feel are debating most is like, are the things that either side here is doing like the right thing to do there? And that's something that I can't really get into, and I don't think we necessarily want to, or maybe, but I just don't know enough facts about it. But yeah, I feel like that's what it is, and I feel like the roots of it reach down to like the colonization, like colonialism in the Arab regions there, and then whatever predates that, and then for obviously like for Israel, the need for having like a safe space. And I think that's the feeling, is that there's a really raw feeling of, from that experience, the experiences of persecution that, like, you know, Jewish people have had for like thousands of years, really, and then more recently in World War II, you know, in the Holocaust. And so it's like wounds that are still there and like still need to be healed for everyone involved. And yeah, but that's all that I feel to say about it, because like, yeah, I feel like we would need more details, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Does anyone have anything based on that?
I agree with you. There's a hurt there from what I've seen. It's like, it's this anti-Semitism argument, basically. And it's like, we just wanted to have a safe place from the Holocaust, and that safe place is under attack. But also, like, some Palestinians feel a bit like robbed of their country, since it was just like her territory before, in a certain period of time, like all the time, but in a certain period of time. And it's just like there's just this root trauma and hurt between the two that is just playing out. And then it plays out in the sense of like we enter politics, and there is a trial to, you know, we try to have like two countries with like territories that are pretty much like kind of equal, and one party doesn't really respect that. Okay, that's a fact. They go to war. Israel went to war. Some things are done. Then Israel wins like other wars, and again, up until like in 1967, we actually have like hope for some kind of peace, or it's actually like a treaty signed between like the Party of Liberation of Palestine and Israel, in order to have something that feels good for both. But this party is infiltrated with Hamas. And it's more complicated than that. But this party is infiltrated with Hamas, will never accept it. And so there was a chance at some type of peace or some type of discussion towards having something better, that didn't happen. And I'm not saying that it's like Palestine's fault. It's no, it's not that. But it's like, what is the choice of leaders, of groups, of domination doing for different people? And that's the same for Israel. Like 40% of the population, that's Peter Zian's words, is like studying the Torah, and when you study the Torah, you don't have to necessarily like work or very little, don't have to go to military. And these people are very extreme in their ways. And I feel like maybe some of these people are the ones that are shown when they do acts of territorialism, and hate on Palestinians, which is not okay. And I feel it's not like what all of the Israelis think about, but is a thing that is represented in the media. So there's like a choice here. It's almost like there's a bad choice in leaders. And the problem with a bad choice in leaders and who represent an opposition, as little or as big as you want to make it, like the leader is going to take it very far. So like you have to be careful with the message of opposition and not love, and for instance, a sense of over that you are putting out in the world. Because in spiritual truth, like there's energy behind that. And so putting out that kind of opposition in terms of energy translates in that victimhood. And it's super hard, super hard to really look at yourself and say, maybe my opposition, in a sense, did this to me. Nobody deserves to have that kind of brutality in their life, that kind of poverty, that kind of like hurt and pain. But like you have to face that a little bit of like not love opens up a way to a whole lot of contrasts and hurt and pain and not love. And that's a very, very, very humbling matter, I would say. So I don't know how you guys feel about that. And I know it is super sensitive, and yeah, but it's just like, a little bit opens up a way for a lot. Like ego acts in small ways in consciousness, and sometimes that it's when you think you're the most righteous, you're the most like right, you're the most like true to yourself, that maybe like there are some things that are coming out. And hating on another religion is never okay. Never.
So I think you touched on something quite important in the sense that, and as you started off your conversation, in the sense that there was a time when it looked like they would reach a level of peace or some type of accord that they could both coexist reasonably. And then you have to ask the question, well, if the intention was true coexistence, cohabitation, how is it then that something was able to infiltrate it to the point where it continuously breaks it down? And I almost have to say, well, it might have just been lip service to an accord. And so it was very easy for discord to be sown within that accord at any given time. And so there was no real conviction behind the intention to coexist. Because as you said, it would be very difficult to break something apart if the intentions were pure. And so there's a purity that didn't exist there. And instead you have this puritanical way of looking at life that always continues to vilify the other tribe. And this otherness is still the root of the challenge. The otherness is still the root of the problem. For as long as people are not seen as human at their core or deserving of a peaceful and comfortable life at their core, there will be conflict. There will also be conflict for as long as people continue to give away their power, to continue to feel like they don't have the right to be in that space and live in that space and create the life that they want in that space.
Yeah, and that's definitely an element that you see, and I feel like too, you can really see that in the disinformation that surrounds, all of the entire history of the conflict, the Israel-Palestine conflicts. That's the one thing I notice about it, is that there's just there's so much disinformation, and you've really got to fact check everything you do there in order to like have any clear understanding. But I do feel like spiritually it's like probably more simple to look at it that way. One thing though that I feel is that this is also partly about like having an internationally agreed upon system on how to resolve conflicts. So like regardless of like who might like have be aligned with like God or love in any given situation, there's the whole thing about like how do we like resolve conflicts basically. And I feel like that is maybe the issue below anything else here, like the foundational issue, because yeah, like this a question of like basically like if we have this disagreement, some sort of disagreement, do we resolve it through like diplomatic and like political means and like respecting the rules and maybe like applying pressure this way or like this kind of protest or that, or do we do this kind of like violence, basic like senseless violence? And obviously there are cases where like you've got to like physically like defend yourself, like with Ukraine, with Russia invading Ukraine, like Russia is intending to like demolish a lot in Ukraine and basically just completely just like take from them and just be a complete siphon off of Ukraine, right? Like that's their intention. So you'd want to stand up like physically, like, to that, right? But I think with this conflict, like it's a little different, and you just wonder like, why is there this like terrorism? Why is Hamas in power? Why are they pursuing this route of, trying to achieve whatever objective that they want to achieve? So I feel like that's more what it's about, and just like whether or not you respect like that, the rules of engagement there or not. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the fact that the rules were not respected at all from the beginning. Are still not respected by some groups there, that like throws confusion into the conflict. But if we remove the acts of some groups, like what are the leaders doing, and I think that's where the truth lies. Even when the past hurts, even when it's super hard, I think that's where we need to look. And I really like what Grenville was saying about the intention were not pure, but it's this puritanical way of seeing the world that creates this violence and conflicts. And I feel this is a great transition into a little topic that is linked to that, actually. And it's the fact that the FBI director said, following the beginning of Hamas attacks, that there was a rise to domestic threats. And obviously this was in the US, but I feel this is very much here too and everywhere in the world. Domestic threats are like rising. Like just a few days after that, 40 minutes away from where I work, and exactly 3 years after a teacher was beheaded for explaining the Paris terrorist attacks from a few years, another teacher was killed in a high school, and he was defending other people that risked getting hurt. And the guy was a former student that just wanted to find any history teacher. And we know that terrorists love birthdays in a very somber way. And so this was definitely the birthday of like Samuel Paty. And I think even if it was a terrorist cell in like Chechnya, it was linked. It couldn't have been anything but linked. It's like this vindictive way of trying to go through life. Like either you've been hurt, or people don't accept your religion, or you don't see your beliefs as the same as other people. And this is not talking about Muslim, because terrorists are not Muslim people for me. But it's like justifying that victimhood with violence, with fighting, with not listening, and that's not okay. And today I was like traveling from Paris to where I am now, and we had at least 2 metro stations blocked, completely blocked, at the very center of Paris. So all activities blocked, trains blocked, because there are so many like bomb scares, things that team miners have to investigate all day. And basically we come back to this idea that even though this is not World War III, the Israel and Palestinian tensions are at the core of how our geopolitical balance works throughout the entire world. And yeah, I think maybe that's why even when we're far away, we can have like sensitivities, thoughts about it, things to talk about. And yeah, it just shows that it's very real for me. I don't know how you feel about like the rise of domestic threats, but I think that was my opinion on what the FBI director said.
So it starts to feel quite a bit as if the perception of peace is actually quite tenuous. So almost surface and superficial, and not actually grounded in reality. And so the balance can be tipped at any point. Because if you think about what has happened at any given time in any year for the last however many years, there's always some type of conflict happening with humanity. There's never been a time that you can comfortably say, even for a 3-month period or a 6-month period, there has been no perception of a level of threat in some way. And so it goes back to Sage's point around identifying and having a relationship with victimhood. And that relationship immediately surfaces every time a new conflict surfaces. And so the anxiety attached to the victimhood starts to surface even more. So the wound stems out of conflict, but that conflict has literally embedded itself as victimhood and potentially feeling less than, and so trying to make oneself appear more than by resorting to violence. So it's this vicious cycle that's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because I feel like a victim, I resort to violence. So then some action has to be taken, which further fuels the victim mentality. And so this thing is actually much more like an infection than a relationship with anything. It just keeps on resurfacing.
Yeah, but that's where people get tripped up, because that's basically, like, peace is the ingredient of the universe. We know that as Unionists. And that's the only reason why centuries-old conflicts still get the chance to exist right now, is that you feel that there's no way out for you, where actually there is a way, and it's peace, and it doesn't look like anything that you may have thought, but you have to surrender. You have to surrender how you thought it would be. That's it, Sage.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that, like, yeah, I feel like the heightened, like, domestic threats, basically it's just showing a place where people are I don't know, how do you say, like, just choosing, I don't know, just choosing hatred, and they might rightly or wrongly identify something going on that's like, that's not aligned with love and everything, but like, to like assign that to a group of people or to a person, like based on their identity, is really just presumptuous, and it's not true. And like, even if someone holds beliefs that you feel support something that's evil, like if you feel that person's beliefs or purported beliefs like are supporting something that I feel is evil or whatever, like that doesn't mean that you like attack that person, you know, because they're not doing anything. They literally can't do anything to you. Like, they can't create in your reality, but people feel that you can. And that's one of the principles in like unionism. And it says in like the book, like Twin Flames Finding Your Ultimate Lover, in the compassion section, that the key to having compassion is knowing that someone else can't really create in your reality, right? So that's key if you want to like have compassion for people, no matter what they think or say or are choosing. And also just knowing that people aren't their choices, you know, like you're not your choices, you're not your feelings or your thoughts, your beliefs don't define you. You're defined by like, you know, yeah, being like a divine child, a child of the divine or of God, or however you want to see it. And I just feel like that's what we need there, is that understanding within people of themselves and of each other. And yeah, but like anytime there's like Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it seems the pattern has been like, yeah, there's been a higher instance of like anti-Semitic and like Islamophobic type of like, you know, threats and hate crimes and everything like that. And yeah, so there's even at Stanford, like where I went to college, there was some professor who was like trying to label like which students were like colonizers and which were like the colonized, and saying like, you're like a colonizer, you're like a colonized person, and like sending some of the colonizer students to the back of the classroom and saying like, this is how like your people treat the colonized people. Yeah, It's just like, it's very like, I was there during, I was in college at Stanford during a really heated time also for Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And my feelings about it back then were really different because I was like really aligned with like the race and ethnic studies group. And they generally were like completely just like on the side of, quote unquote, side of the Palestinians. And I use air quotes because it's not useful to talk about sides always. And I'm like, yeah, like that's it, because these people, they're saying someone's background or who they are or their beliefs are grounds for like trying to attack them. And like that's just not true. That's not how we resolve conflicts, you know. But it's pervasive, but we have to look within ourselves and love ourselves instead of like pointing the finger. I don't know. That's what I feel about it. And yeah, and all of that. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. You have some piece, like you have a truth to it. Even like trying to support a side, I think people have some truth to it, but I think what is highly disturbing is trying to point out that it's Israelis' faults as a whole, or Jewish faults as a whole, or Palestinians' faults as a whole, or Muslims' faults as a whole, in order to justify your side of the conflict. That's what's just really disturbing to me. And like colonizers colonized, saying, I think there's nothing like, even if it went from a good intention of trying to be aware of like a conflict and the past pains and the things like that, I think it is never okay to me. Nadia, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I see the duality of both sides. We see a side where you're perpetuating victimhood, and it comes to a point, like you guys mentioned, of aggression and violence because of this, your own your own subject of victimism. And then there's this other side where you're just so fearful of other, like the otherness that they will attack, and then you're manifesting that fear. So it brings into question where Macron, I'm not sure how to say his last name, but it really gave an opportunity to bring inclusiveness after this attack, this heinous attack that should not have any labels, but rather bring in a sore point of disruption within the country. And although his statement, like we were mentioning about the purity of intention in leadership, although his statement was pure in bringing unity into the country and seeking unity, there is still laws in place that are still pointing to labels of being other. You know, there's a ban on hijab, and now in the Olympics, there's a ban on hijab for athletes. So if leaders were to truly bring unionism, they have to bring both what they say and what they do into a core too of purity. And then it goes on both sides, like not allowing yourself to be oppressed by any laws of your own rights and your own viewpoints. So yeah, there is a need to see duality on both sides.
Mm-hmm. I think even
Also, sorry, carry on, Doreen.
Even with the sensitive question of hijab, I think France and Macron's statement basically showed there's a side of like France recognizing Palestinians, not necessarily Palestinians, but it speaks to like, hey, everyone is human. And just as simple as that. And it could be as simple as that, I feel. And that was a really correct message. So yeah, Grenville.
I think you've touched on two very important things: recognizing another's humanity, and then also the choice for peace that is the core ingredient. And we also have to remember that peace actually looks like boredom if you're not accustomed to it. And so what happens is that the anxiety that's fueling our experience makes us want to make something happen, whether that something is good or not, because peace looks like boredom if you're not accustomed to it. So there is healing into accepting peace as well, that is probably more collective healing that is required.
Yeah, and also just being careful of like, don't let grievances become a part of your like identity, you know, because as much as the history of like different, you know, groups or whatever, like throughout history could have a lot of instances of like, oh, this was an instance of us being victimized, this was an instance of, you know, this and that. Like, you don't want that to be, that's not your identity, you know. Because yeah, like, because you know that like spiritually that just manifests more of what you ultimately don't want, you know. Yeah, that's what I felt from it.
It's very true and very powerful. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so last 14 minutes. I just want to talk quickly about like something that has been going on ever since our last discussion as well. And it is Congress and what is happening in Congress, and basically McCarthy being demoted by Republicans, but specifically led by that politician from Florida that I never remember the name of.
Oh, Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, Matt Gaetz. Yeah. And so Peter Z has an interesting point of view about it as well, which is that anyone that can potentially agree with Democrats on even one thing, one little thing, will not be the spokesperson. And that's the reason why, that's the true reason why McCarthy was demoted, even when it was a risk for shutdown. And that speaks a whole lot to a whole lot of things. Like, I think, like, do you remember that representative on TikTok? The one that speaks about like what is going on from time to time. And it was basically saying that he never accepted sponsors when he was in the House, I think. I think he's in the House. Is he in Senate? I don't remember.
No, I think it's in the House.
Never, because that speaks to like people just agreeing with like business instead of politics, national interest. And also that he was basically exposing the fake anger of a lot of people when they were on public air, politicians when they were on public air, and that were very calm and cool and collected behind closed doors when discussing this same political matters. And so that is pretty sad to see that the Republican Party would go as far as, and that's not to say that there's like a bad party and good party, but would go as far as not have anyone as a leader that could even agree with Democrats, even if it feels like a reasonable thing to agree with them on some basic human stuff that is discussed in a political house. And yeah, that's a whole lot as well, what's happening in Congress. So Americans, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it was interesting. Because the whole thing happened because Kevin McCarthy, the speaker before this, was for creating some sort of compromise in the government budget, right, bill that was being passed, so that the government wouldn't shut down, because government shutdowns can cause some degree of like economic and political like turbulence and chaos, and we don't like it. And so, but he had to work with some Democrats to do that, basically. And yeah, that was like not viewed favorably, I guess, by the Republican Party. Or I guess to your point, Eurine, about like the posturing, like it's like fake anger, and like behind closed doors, everyone's very like cool and businesslike or about everything, right? Like it's not like it's not like when the cameras are off, like fists are flying or anything. Like this is like not that kind of deal. But like publicly, like in the public image that the Republican Party was trying to portray, like they saw it as not politically advantageous to have their Speaker of the House making some deal, with the other side politically. And so they eventually settled on Mike Johnson, who's like recent, like he's only been in the House for like 6 years. Definitely like someone who falls on like the far end of the spectrum in terms of like right-wing politics, but isn't like super well known, or like isn't a super vocal person, or hasn't been like very high profile. So I guess it's kind of like a compromise in a way, because it's someone who like really stands on a further kind of more outlier position, but who's also not like super vocal about it, or who's like not super well known. So I don't know. And so I'm viewing it as like it's mostly like a symbolic thing. And and I do feel there's a sense of peace, I guess, now that there is a new speaker, because like business can resume and everything, and it wasn't able to for like several weeks. So that's good. And I also feel like Kevin McCarthy's, when he became speaker, like there were so many votes and there was so much like negotiation and like backroom dealing and stuff like that. And when he was confirmed as speaker, it felt very much like unstable, that he had to kind of like claw his way into the position, right? And to me, like it didn't really feel peaceful, and it's kind of not a surprise that it didn't last. So plus a condition of him, or one thing that happened in the context of that too is the rules being changed so that any individual in the House could bring up a vote to the speaker to remove the speaker. So it was kind of like founded on something really unstable. So it makes sense. So in that sense, I feel this is more peaceful now, what we have, and it's good, I guess. So that's what I feel about it. But do you guys agree, or do you guys have any more insights on that? It's kind of like
I'm gonna start off immediately and say, no, it does not feel peaceful.
to have the new guy.
No, the new guy is not the challenge. The challenge is that there doesn't feel like there's peace in the fact that these two parties are actually meant to be running a nation and serving the people.
Oh, yeah.
And, it just feels like a perpetual tug of war amongst toddlers. Like, I get it that a lot of it is very dramatized for whatever effect, but I feel like the interests of the people are not fully being served in the fact that there's such a strong sense of opposition between these two parties vying for political power. So it doesn't feel peaceful to me. It just feels like putting a further right person in there just actually reverts it back to what it's always been, which is that people are actually just accustomed to the battle. And that is not peaceful to me for the American people.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It hasn't always been that way either. I think in different times of like heightened tension, it's become more polarized at times through history. And this is definitely a time of very heightened tension, right? So we know that, and with one, with like, right, the former president like Donald Trump being like, under heavy like legal scrutiny for trying to like overturn the last election and many other things, right? And so that's not a time when, that's not a low stress time. That's like one of the highest stress times for the country, right? So I get it, but part of me feels like I'm like, at least they have someone in charge now and they can at least attempt to get something done or do a semblance of trying to get something done. Like Congress stopping for like close to a month is like much worse than having like an extremist person installed. That was my feeling about it. And that's why I'm like, this is more peaceful than chaos, And my feeling too of it is that the people's will is drama to some extent. Like people vote for these people, and these people perpetuate drama. And if many people want drama, that's just what they're going to get. And we peaceful people are just going to live our lives, chop wood, carry water in our own peaceful little corner of existence while everyone else freaks out. And
can't they leave the drama to Hollywood? We need good movies.
well, but Hollywood's been weak too recently, right? So this kind of makes up for it.
Because that's because all the plot twists are happening in Congress as opposed to in movies.
I feel like there should be more than enough like interesting plots to go around. I don't think we need to ration it. So yeah. Do you guys feel that though? Like I feel like it's inevitable because the population itself is very polarized and is very like they're throwing hands, like they're all drama. Not everybody, but like, do you guys, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's just,
No, you're not wrong.
I don't know.
No, it's just, I guess to some extent, it is a representation of a population, and maybe that's, maybe the election, like placing Meg Johnson feels like some type of how can I say this? Of representation of how polarized it is right now. Maybe not. And maybe that's why it feels like, oh, like it might be aligned with a choice. And then there's also this thing about like, hey, the public interest is just like not respected. And we're kind of quite tired, becoming at least quite tired about it. I mean, that's all.
Yeah, I feel that.
So Nadia, I am gonna have to stop you because we have reached our hour. And so I believe that the topic has brought up something that's worth further exploration. So we're going to thank everybody for participating today and for following us. And we're going to ask them to share their thoughts so that we can explore the topic further and bring it back next week. And so to everybody, thank you for following us. And to those who have not yet, please also feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.